ADM Jabalpur vs Shivkant Shukla, 1976. Plaintiff, Additional District Magistrate, ADM, Jabalpur. Defendant, Shivkant Shukla. Facts. In June 1975, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi declared a state of emergency in India, citing internal disturbances. Under the emergency, civil liberties were suspended, and political opponents were arrested without trial. The government enforced Preventive Detention Act, which allowed authorities to detain individuals without filing formal charges or bringing them to trial. Shivkant Shukla, along with several others, was arrested under the Maintenance of Internal Security Act, MISA, without any legal recourse. These detainees filed habeas corpus petitions across various high courts, arguing that their detention was illegal as it violated their fundamental right to personal liberty under Article 21 of the Constitution of India. The high courts, including Allahabad, Delhi, and others, ruled in favor of the detainees, holding that the government's actions were unlawful and that fundamental rights under Articles 21 and 22 could not be suspended even during a state of emergency. In response, the government appealed to the Supreme Court, questioning whether courts had the authority to intervene in detention cases during an emergency. Issues before the court: whether a writ of habeas corpus is maintainable during the period of emergency, whether fundamental rights under Articles 14, 19, and 21, particularly the right to personal liberty, could be enforced when a proclamation of emergency was in force and the right to seek judicial remedy was suspended, whether the executive's decision to detain individuals without trial could be reviewed by the judiciary during an emergency. Decision of the court. The Supreme Court, by a 4-1 majority, ruled in favor of the government. The majority bench, led by Chief Justice A.N. Ray, held that during the emergency, the writ of habeas corpus could not be maintained as the right to personal liberty under Article 21 was suspended. The court reasoned that when the President declares an emergency and issues orders under Article 359, citizens lose their ability to seek judicial remedies for the enforcement of rights under Part 3 of the Constitution. Justice H.R. Khanna, the lone dissenter, disagreed with the majority. He opined that the right to life and personal liberty is so essential that it could not be taken away, even during an emergency, without proper legal procedure. His dissent remains one of the most celebrated judgments in Indian constitutional law. The decision legitimized the government's stance, allowing it to continue detaining individuals without trial during the emergency. The ruling effectively rendered Article 21 unenforceable during the emergency. Case analysis. The ADM Jabalpur case became one of the most controversial judgments in the history of the Indian judiciary. The majority judgment was criticized for being overly deferential to executive power and for undermining the rule of law. The decision was seen as a setback for constitutional protections and the rights of individuals. The majority's interpretation of Article 21 and Article 359(1) led to a period where citizens were denied access to legal recourse, even when their personal liberty was at stake. This created a legal vacuum during the emergency, giving the government unchecked authority to curtail civil rights. Justice Khanna's dissent stood out as a straw in defense of constitutional rights. He asserted that the Constitution's spirit should be to protect individual liberty and that courts have a duty to safeguard personal liberty, regardless of the prevailing political situation. His position highlighted the judiciary's role as a check on executive power and emphasized the importance of judicial independence. This case was widely criticized by constitutional scholars, lawyers, and civil rights advocates for its negative impact on democratic principles and individual freedoms. It remains a powerful reminder of the dangers of absolute power in the hands of the executive during times of emergency. Importance. The ADM Jabalpur case is significant for several reasons. Impact on fundamental rights. The case established that during an emergency, the rights guaranteed under Part 3 of the Constitution, particularly the right to life and personal liberty under Article 21, can be suspended. This ruling raised concerns about the vulnerability of individual freedoms in times of crisis. Judicial deference to executive. The case highlighted the judiciary's subordination to the executive during the emergency, which was seen as a failure of the judiciary to protect citizens' rights. The court's decision underscored the importance of an independent judiciary in maintaining checks and balances on executive power. Justice Khanna's dissent became a landmark in the history of Indian jurisprudence, symbolizing the resilience of judicial integrity. His stand against executive overreach, even in the face of strong political pressure, has been celebrated as a beacon of judicial independence. His dissent later inspired the judiciary to restore the primacy of fundamental rights. Subsequent developments: the judgment was effectively overturned by later constitutional amendments and Supreme Court rulings, most notably in the case of Maneka Gandhi v. Union of India, 1978, which expanded the scope of Article 21, establishing that the right to life and personal liberty could not be curtailed except through a procedure that is just, fair, and reasonable. Legacy of the case: the ADM Jabalpur ruling has had a lasting impact on the discourse surrounding civil liberties and emergency powers. It is often cited in discussions about the balance between national security and individual rights. The judgment's flaws, particularly its failure to safeguard individual rights during emergencies, continue to serve as a cautionary tale in Indian constitutional law. The case remains a controversial episode in India's legal history, underscoring the fragility of fundamental rights in the face of authoritarianism and executive overreach.